So I think what we're going to talk about is lines up with it. There's the standards board consequence. There's the outside of the formal standards process or judicial board, there's recognizing men in the chapter or holding them accountable or picking the right men to be the men we honor. There's dealing with alumni or guests that come to our events or to our properties that we have to be concerned about. And so the key thing is that I think oftentimes when we think about responding to people's behavior, we do that within the context of always thinking about like a punishment. So you pull your judicial board together outside of a formal hearing process with a brother. So they're meeting regularly to play a bigger role in the chapter. And I think that's a key part of it, is that when you're looking for how do we deal with apathetic brothers who aren't engaging and meeting the expectations, or what do we do when we're trying to make a culture shift in the chapter, sometimes we oftentimes think that obligation has to be with only the president. Right. So that's a separate section conversation, but I think that's a precursor to being able to manage behavior or, and I don't mean individual behavior, issues, not just incidents. We spend a lot of time talking about incidents, and we need to talk about issues. We learned that a lot when we started working on hazing prevention nationally, was that when we talked about hazing incidents, it was a very different conversation than when we looked at it as an issue. I think Connor is really looking at issues in his chapter. Terrence, you shared in this earlier session that you're trying to look at issues, but also we're looking at incidents and individual behavior. The key thing is for you to operationally set up a board of accountability, a peer level of accountability, your judicial board, in a high functioning way, and make sure that your bylaws clearly reflect the function of that body. And that's where you handle situations. If you have a sergeant at arms, quite honestly, that's not paying his dues, is there nothing in your bylaws about you have to be current in your dues to hold a leadership position? If he writes the bylaws, but he doesn't affirm the bylaws, the chapter should affirm the bylaws. So the bylaws should clearly state that you have to be in good standing, right? Isn't that in your bylaws? To be an officer. And then when you're not, the issue isn't his behavior only, it's the fact that the chapter's not enforcing their own standards. And so you have to kind of look at it both ways. So I think that, I know PIKE has a very clear outline of that process. One of the back fields that we're going to populate on the webpage for you all is a resource guide on how to train a standards board, a judicial board, how to not realigning the PIKE process, but really how to prepare them and how to do some of the work that I think, Cameron, you're probably already doing, how to utilize them in the chapter for a more high functioning service. Well, and what that lends itself to is that really that operational definition of self-governance. That I found it on a blog, I contacted the blog writer wasn't the original author, I kept tracking it back through people. Nobody really knows who originally came up with the definition. I know that several fraternity and sorority life advisors have used it, but so it's out there in the world, but I think this one really speaks to the role of governance in a chapter, because, and I shared this with y'all yesterday, because it really talks to, it's that systemic approach that you take to operate on your principles and values. So I love that your first answer is the ritual, obviously, because that's the one place where you really put those values into action, and you put the symbolism with your values. That's, I don't know what that symbolism is, but rituals have very concrete characteristics. And so you really put the symbolism and the meaning oftentimes behind those principles and values. But the conversation probably starts when men are new members. PIKE just changed, didn't they? How hard is that for y'all to shift that conversation from pledge to new member? That's a pretty new change in your fraternity, isn't it? Yeah, do you know why? Do you know why that changed? This is like a real quick side. Do you know why they shifted? They asked for the fraternity to start using the term for new member instead of pledge? Pardon? It is. What do you think, Bryce? Connotation behind the word. One, it's a perception. There's a political side. If PIKE is calling their new members pledges, then the university is like, they even call their new members pledges. But then the other side of it is a mindset. That's a really big issue that they're trying to shift there, is to not think, because pledge has such a derogatory connotation to it that really we can thank Animal House for. Because prior to that, it really didn't have as extreme of a negative connotation. But when John Belushi, screamed the word pledge, remember the guy that stood in the lineup and like spit every time he said the word pledge? Yeah, that's the guy that made pledge like a really difficult word for us. But when you meet with your new members, you really start to establish those conversations. And what this is really about is setting up a system where you have an ethical code of behavior. Where's that defined? In the bylaws of your chapter. the constitution of the national fraternity is where you find some things, but the other things will come out of the bylaws of your chapter. And it's in those bylaws where you'll look and see, what have we said is acceptable behavior? So that's an initial challenge, I think, for any and all of you, is to go back and say, what do we define as acceptable behavior in our chapter, and how are we defining that? And is it clear? And then what behavior are we finding unacceptable right now? And how is that not reflected in our governing documents? And do we need to make some changes to have this reflected in our governing documents? And really then that becomes the process that you elect people by, you discipline people by, and it's really all about doing the right thing. That's the precursor to all of this, is that a chapter that's truthfully invested in self-governance and doing things the right way can move forward and be more effective when they're trying to hold people accountable. So what's your response to that? What are the values of PIKE? Pardon? Yeah, scholarship, leadership, athlete, and gentleman, right? So that's one place. But then there's also core value statement that's in the principal documents of the organization that you'll find. It's in that same area where the vision and mission of the fraternity are. I believe they actually gave you a copy of those in your little binder. Yes, so say that louder.
To developing men of integrity and like the honorable character, and fostering a truly lifelong fraternal spirit.
Yes. So those are also things that define what you value as a fraternity. Truthful? And so how is that reflected in your bylaws? How do your bylaws reflect that this is what, or your expectations, which is where you write, that's what your bylaws do, your expectations of how your members are going to perform and how they're going to act, and how their guests are going to engage with your chapter when your chapter's having an event, because guests can impede that moving forward as well, just as much as one person. And the key is, you really have to get to a place where you can talk about what they look like. Because what one guy thinks gentlemanly behavior is might be vastly different from what another man thinks gentlemanly behavior is. And it's not about an individual man, it's about the chapter and it's about the fraternity. So you have to talk about what does that look like. True PIKE, that's instead of saying, what are we going to do about our sergeant at arms who doesn't pay his dues and misrepresents the chapter and is not the best person, and then we say, well, we'll get rid of him. And then you have the whole conversation about, well, how do we do that? He's our brother. We don't want to piss him off. He's popular in the chapter. What's the process? If you shift the question to what needs to change, either with the brother's behavior, with the chapter function, whatever, then you get into a whole different place, and that's how you impact change. I'm gonna give you a really quick illustration. And it's an over dramatized situation, and I'm not assuming that you all have this problem, but it's the person who goes to your social event and is irresponsible with their alcohol consumption. They drink too much, and as a consequence, they're setting off fire extinguishers, or they're punching holes in the wall, or they're insulting one of your the young ladies who's at your event. They're making your life difficult because now instead of getting to have fun at the party, you're having to manage their behavior. They're frustrating in the sense that they aren't representing your fraternity. And it's not like you're all a whole bunch of yahoos, but there's this one guy who's all about the shenanigans and he causes problems. And we put him in a standards conversation, formal or informal, and we say, what are we going to do to him? Well, let's make him the sober monitor. Has anybody ever done that? Anybody ever taken the guy who drank too much at the party and made him the sober monitor? How'd that work out for you? It worked out awful for you?
We didn't try that. But
how are you?
It's gone well so far.
It went well for you to do that? Okay. It didn't go well for you, why?
Well, we didn't do that, but it just sounds like a really...
Oftentimes it backfires for two reasons. One, I will tell you a challenge I'll give, and I'm not saying don't do that if it works for you. I'm saying, but think about it before you utilize it, because what it will often do is it might not even be speaking to what the problem is. It's just a consequence. It's not thoughtful necessarily. If you go through a process of really thinking about what contributed to the behavior, and you realize that they just don't have respect for the men who have to serve as the sober monitors, and they need to understand what it takes to manage that event and how their behavior as an individual brother really distracted from taking care of the event, then I can see that being one of several things you might try. But when it's just you got drunk and acted like a fool, so next time you don't get to get drunk. And you're going to be responsible for watching everybody else that might get drunk. Well, two things happen. One, what that tells me is what? The most important thing about your party is what? Getting drunk. It's the most important thing. So you're going to take it away from me. But if you think about instead of just making the sober monitor, because sometimes they don't show up, they don't stay sober, they don't do their job sincerely. That can be a chapter culture thing. You have a brother, Lewis, who has a chapter where that is effective. Where do you go to school, Lewis? At Wayne State. That's something that's been working. And so that might be a culture thing. But when you ask, what are you trying to change? The only way to get to that is you have to ask a question first. When you're talking to this guy, my favorite question, what made you think that was okay? But when you start to act upon what you're trying to change, then what you do is you actually come up with a consequence or an activity or a tactic or a strategy that will actually make things better. Not Kim Novak's school and philosophy on how to deal with behavior or sanctioning and standards boards only. This is all based on the field of public health and culture change and high-risk behavior shifting. And for years, we've kept it out of our student organization side. But it's a really interesting way to think about governing and running organizations that are high risk or dealing with high-risk situations. And it doesn't always have to mean death or destruction or terrifying, horrible things. It can be somebody who's not living up to your values. And you say, what contributed to this problem? When you're doing that one-on-one, that's the question in the conduct meeting. What made you think this was okay? Well, this is the norm of our chapter, and this is just what we do. But as an officer in the chapter, do you see where we might need to rethink our norms? Give me an answer. Let role play this with me. But as an officer in the chapter, do you see how this behavior isn't really modeling what we need the norms to be?
But we're still doing other stuff. I mean, the guys in the chapter are happy with the way things are going right now. And so why do we need to change all this stuff and waste time and money when we're here to have a good time and not worry about that kind of stuff?
Okay. So then in my mind, what that would tell, so what in that situation, what I would be hearing is, who cares? Who cares? We're having a good time, this is who we are. Then what in my mind, if I was in this conversation with a group of my brothers, trying to get a handle on how do I help there be change in this chapter, then in my mind I'd make a little note that one of the things that needs to change is there needs to be an awareness of the identity of what it means to be a PIKE. Because right now they're a social club and not a fraternity, right? They're acting like a social club and anybody with PIKE letters and not necessarily a fraternity. That's the difference between a frat and a fraternity. Social club fraternity is fraternities party, but they also do other things, right? So one of the things that needs to change is they need to have a better understanding of what it means to be beyond the chapter, that we're PIKE. And we're not just PIKE at this school, we're PIKE. And so what that looks like. So that doesn't mean that you're gonna change it in the conversation, but just asking those questions will get you your strategic plan. So you just ask, what contributed to the problem? You know, it's asking people why they think it's okay to set off a fire extinguisher when they're drunk. And when they say it's because I'm drunk, then you need to say what needs to change with that person. Well, did you say they don't need to be drunk around fire extinguishers? What if they're setting it off in your house? How many of you have a house? What do you do if that happens? Some guy damages the house. What do you do? Make him pay for it? Fine him? Does he do it again? Fining does not change behavior. Fining is good to fine people to get shit paid for. Excuse me. Fining is good to get a little bit of money for your judicial board to have access to do things. Fining, for me, is a great way to put money in the coffers to come to stuff like this. Like fine guys and put that money away to send people to leadership experiences in the fraternity. That's an awesome thing to do with fine money. I'm all about that. But fining, there's nothing in why people do things that say fining is going to change the behavior. So and really what you're doing is you're saying what needs to change. Well, I was drunk. Well, you need to learn how to manage how much you're drinking. And if it's I always want to be drunk, you know, there's really great stuff. There's an app on the iPhone for how you can figure out how drunk you get, and then and when you're, whatever you drink, what do you drink, Jace? What's your drink of choice? Beer. So you mostly drink beer. And do you drink, what kind is there? Do you drink a certain kind of beer? Because malts have a higher alcohol content than non-malts. Okay, so you're a Bud Light drinker, so beer is a standard drink. How many beers do you think you have when you're partying? Yeah, see, there's a way to do this though. It's really interesting, and you could actually have the guy do this, and they may get frustrated, but it's, you know what? They might actually learn something. Sometimes there's the epiphany. Remember in the earlier session I talked about punch, and how the guys had the epiphany that their punch was 3 standard drinks in a keg cup, and a girl drank 2, and she just drank 6 standard drinks, and no wonder she thought she got roofied. Well, it's a really powerful thing to have somebody back out of their drinking and say, I drink makers. And when I pour it like this. And if I'm drinking in a good night over a 4-hour period at a party, I'm drinking this many makers. And if I weigh this much, this is how intoxicated I'm getting. And then they're like, and that's the norm, and who really cares? But you don't stop them there. Then you say things like, well, let's see, you have a test the next day at 10 o'clock. Do you know that at 10 o'clock in the morning, you're still going to be at a 0.08? Because alcohol, no matter what you drink, what you eat, what aspirin you ingest, how cold of a shower you take, how much coffee you drink, the alcohol doesn't leave your body at any faster rate than 0.016% an hour. That's the process of it leaving your body. And you work up, and then will have an epiphany, like, I'm still like legally drunk when I took my exam. Let them think. I worked at Auburn, I worked with a little group, and there was a guy who would walk around their parties, the president would always walk around their parties, and he'd have a keg cup, and he'd have beer in it. And I was there, and somebody was like, I think it's really inappropriate that the president has been drinking all night. And I'm like, why don't you go grab that cup and put your finger in it and see how warm that beer is? Because it's the same beer he's had in that cup since we started the night. He would do the little, act like nobody paid attention. You know why he did that? So that his brothers didn't say, oh, you're not cool because you drink with us. But it was nasty, warm, flat beer. Because it was the same beer he had in the cup. And he learned that because he had to be the president and watch it. So it's teaching, creating opportunities, kind of got on the sidebar there, creating opportunities to help guys figure things out. And a really interesting thing to do with chapter operations, like if you're planning a strategic planning retreat, or you're just going back and wow, we got this cool opportunity, new guys, is to ask them, what do you think the biggest challenges are we face as a chapter? Don't even say problem. And then get that down in the room. I'm a big fan of putting voices in the room, and a strategic way to do that sometimes is to not have people raise their hands. So instead of in a conduct hearing saying, why'd you do this? It's saying, what do you think the problem is in the chapter? What do you think our big challenges are? And throwing Post-it notes all over the chapter room and saying, for each problem that you think we have or challenge we have, write it on a Post-it note. It's called mind mapping. It's like where I stole this from. And so you take all these Post-it notes from the chapter and you put them up here on a wall. And you get a couple guys to come sort them into themes. When you first look at them, you'll freak out. Because even if you have 40 guys in your chapter, you'll go, there's 120 problems. Not really. You start theming it out, and you hear from the chapter what they think the core issues are. And do you know why you get better answers than having everybody raise their hands? It's anonymous, and I don't have to be cool. So it's really okay to say irresponsible drinking. So you put the problems up, and then you ask, well, why does this happen? What's a problem that you think you might have in your chapter that you'd like to change?
Not thinking you're responsible for doing something wrong.
Okay. So one of the things is a lack of accountability. So then the next series of questions is, what does that look like? What's a lack of accountability look like? So you know everybody's talking about the same thing. You would say, people don't step up and accept responsibility for what they do, or they fail to recognize when they have bad behavior. Somebody else might say, people who don't pay their dues. Somebody else might say, people who vote to do intramurals and then don't show up. People who vote for sorority philanthropy and then don't participate. Does your chapter do that? Oh yeah, let's all do the DG Anchor Splash. Yes, we're all gonna do it. And then Anchor Splash comes and who's there? But it's thinking about asking them, so why is this a problem? What makes it hard for us to have accountability? Because that tells you what needs to change. And then you have to look at that and say, what do we have the ability to change? And what do we not have the ability to change? Somebody who is hell-bent on blacking out drinking every time they go to a social event, you may or may not have the capacity to change their individual behavior. So then you have to step back from that and decide. It goes back to that little risk management talk we had the other day. Can't do a lot with the individual, but we got to do something to mitigate the risk they're putting up on the chapter. So now I'm going to put them in a position where their choice to drink like that we can't get them to change, we've tried, they're not willing to come along with us, doesn't expose the chapter to risk. You don't get to drink when you come to events. You don't get to come to events where there's alcohol. We're gonna have somebody watching you, and as soon as, if you get to this point, we're gonna have to ask you to leave. We're gonna have to put restrictions on you because you're putting the chapter at risk. That's when it gets harder, because then you're like, oh, but he's my brother and he's popular. But trust me, more men, the true norm is probably that more men would be happy that things like that were happening than wouldn't be happy. You also, sometimes you have to look for who else needs to change. If you're talking about a conduct case and you're talking with a brother who's been irresponsible with his consumption, and I know there's other behaviors that you deal with, that's just an easy illustration. Who was a bystander to that? How many brothers had the opportunity to slow him down? Think about the new guy who pre-games with actives or older guys in the chapter. So he comes in because he does something stupid, newer guy, younger guy. Who gave him the alcohol? Who encouraged him to match shot for shot? Who wasn't monitoring the bar right? Who didn't step in when they could have stepped in? You ever have that happen? How many times has there been a problem in your chapter, and if somebody would have just said something in the moment, it wouldn't have been a problem? But they come running to you as an officer, if you're an officer, and say, hey, Jace, so-and-so did this. You need to do something about it. That's the bystander. Part of this is not necessarily, I'm not saying punish them, but I think it's also asking them, so why didn't you do anything? Not my job. So what needs to change? If you have a group of guys in the chapter who say, it wasn't my job, it's not my job, I wasn't the sober monitor, so it wasn't my job to keep an eye on him. What would you say to that?